You know, usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there's this baseline expectation of precision. It almost feels like engineering.
Right, it's very binary.
Exactly. Like you fall down, your arm hurts, you go to the hospital, and the x-ray shows that, that jagged little white line on the screen.
Yeah, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is. That's the problem.
Right. It's clean.
Yeah.
And it's comforting because the problem is visible. It fits into this neat little category that we can treat. But then you take a step away from biology and you start wading into the world of complex human systems.
Which is incredibly messy.
So messy. I mean, we're talking about fringe religious groups, sprawling internet conspiracies, and like massive algorithmic institutional databases.
Yeah.
Suddenly that x-ray machine is just, well, it's completely useless.
Yeah, you're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is honestly incredibly murky. It's much harder to just point a finger and say, oh, there is the fracture.
Which is exactly why we're here. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled to have you, our listener, riding shotgun with us today because today your mission and ours is to unpack this stack of incredibly dense but absolutely fascinating philosophical and scientific documents.
They really are dense, but so worth it.
Yeah, they all center around something called the Bridge 360 Metatheory model. Specifically, we're looking at the updated framework as of 2026.
Right.
And our goal is to figure out how this one singular, highly academic lens connects three things that just, they seem entirely unrelated on the surface. We're looking at the tragic physical enclosure of the Jonestown settlement in the 1970s, the decentralized, purely digital conspiracy of QAnon, and then...
This is the crazy part.
Right. The highly operational data architecture of Palantir's modern work with ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
It is quite the intellectual journey. I mean, we were drawing a line from a remote jungle compound straight through an internet message board and ending up inside a billion-dollar enterprise operating system.
It's completely wild. But the sources make a really compelling case that the exact same structural physics are at play in all three. Now, before we go any further, I do want to say this directly to you listening right now. This deep dive inevitably touches on some highly politically charged content.
Yeah, we're covering some heavy ground today.
We are. We're going to be discussing right-wing and left-wing topics, as well as incredibly sensitive, tragic historical events. And both of us just want to be crystal clear from the jump here. We are not taking sides.
Absolutely not.
We're not passing moral judgments, and we are certainly not endorsing any political viewpoints. We're strictly and impartially analyzing the structural phenomena exactly as they are laid out in the source material provided to us.
Right, that's a vital distinction. We are just looking at the physics of how human belief and action are governed by the systems they inhabit.
Okay, let's unpack this. What if the ultimate danger in these massive controlling systems isn't that they are built on lies? What if the real danger is that they perfectly execute a trap that destroys our ability to navigate reality at all?
That is the core terrifying premise of the Bridge 360 Metatheory model. To even understand it, the author asks us to step into what they define as revolutionary science space.
Okay, what does that actually mean?
Well, it means we have to take our traditional classical concepts of true and false and, just for a moment, set them entirely aside.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, Bridge 360 draws on these foundational thinkers. We're talking about Kurt Gödel in mathematics, Alan Turing in computing, Claude Shannon in information theory. And it argues that physical systems, informational systems, and social systems, they don't exist in separate universes.
Right.
They all operate within one single entropy geometry.
Okay, entropy geometry. So, meaning the laws that govern chaos and order in, like a literal physics lab, are the exact same laws governing the chaos and order of a social network or a political institution.
You're hitting on the core issue perfectly. In Bridge 360, the boundary between the physical world and cyberspace is treated as a mere governance convenience. It is not a real hard wall. Think about how the boundary between physics and chemistry blurs when you get down to a certain level of thermodynamics. So the massive paradigm shift here is that instead of asking the traditional question we've all been taught to ask, is this statement true? Bridge 360 asks, is this system navigable?
I have to push back a little here because that sounds, honestly, pretty radical. If we're completely ignoring truth and just looking at navigability, aren't we basically giving up on reality? Aren't we saying truth doesn't matter anymore?
What's fascinating here is Bridge 360 doesn't deny that objective reality exists. It's not nihilism.
Okay, phew.
Right? Rather, it warns that focusing purely on truth-seeking can actually blind us to how systems manage entropy. It means how they manage uncertainty, disorder, and risk.
Got it.
If you are only ever looking for what is true, you might completely miss the fact that the system you're participating in is slowly, methodically removing all of your exit doors.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's like staring so hard at a compass that you don't realize you're like walking off a cliff. Spot on. And to measure how close you are to that cliff, Bridge 360 introduces a concept called Rule of Inference Memetics, or RIM.
RIM, okay.
Yeah, RIM treats logical rules, the actual cognitive pathways we use to connect one thought to another, as physical, replicable memes.
Oh, like a gene.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just like a biological gene replicates in a population, a rule of inference replicates in a social system. It survives and spreads if it reduces the cognitive burden on the people using it, completely, regardless of whether it leads to an objectively true outcome.
You know, when I was reading through this section, I kept thinking of an analogy to finance. It's like borrowing money to pay the interest on a previous loan. It's this process of inferential compounding.
Yes, that's a great way of it.
You make one small logical leap to solve a problem. Then you use that leap as a solid foundation for the next one and the next one. Suddenly, a tiny initial assumption is supporting this massive, towering architecture of belief.
And the metric of intelligence in this model isn't how tall that tower gets. It's the state of the inference corridor. That is the crucial term here. Inference corridor.
Right. Does the system's architecture allow you to correct errors? Does it allow you to safely reverse course when you inevitably hit a dead end? Or does it lock you in, progressively destroying your optionality until you can only move in one direction?
I think this is where we have to look at the first major case study in the sources because it makes this abstract idea devastatingly real. We're looking at the 1978 Jonestown tragedy in Guyana, where 918 people died.
It's an incredibly heavy example.
It is. Now, society usually compresses this horrific event into a very simple, digestible narrative, right? A charismatic madman brainwashed a cult, and it led to mass suicide. But the documents argue this is an incredibly lazy, lossy compression of history. It throws away all the vital information about how the system actually functioned on a mechanical level.
Yeah, it is a lossy compression because it assumes human beings just had a switch flipped in their brains. Bridge 360 breaks down the tragedy not as a sudden mystical mind control event, but as a slow, massive corridor contraction.
Because it didn't start out that way, did it?
Not at all. What's often forgotten is that People's Temple actually started out in Indiana as a highly fit pro-social meme. It promoted racial integration, economic aid, communal solidarity in a very divided time.
Wow.
It was highly navigable and provided real, tangible benefits to its members.
But then the system evolved. The rules of how the group processed reality changed. And this is where that inferential compounding comes in. The sources highlight how two specific classical logical fallacies became a literal physical trap.
Yes, affirming the consequent and denying the antecedent.
Which sound like debate club terms.
But under the Bridge 360 lens, these aren't just debate club errors. They operate as the literal mechanics of corridor closure. Let's look at affirming the consequent, or AC. Bridge 360 calls this the attractor strengthening operator.
Okay, unpack that term for me. Attractor strengthening operator. What does that look like in practice?
In Jonestown, the logic went like this. If we are being persecuted by the government, then outsiders will criticize us in the press. Outsiders are criticizing us in the press. Therefore, they conclude, we are being persecuted by the government.
Ah, I see. It turns every single piece of outside criticism into confirmation of the leader's paranoid narrative.
Exactly.
The system becomes completely immune to external correction. If the media investigates them, it just proves to the members that Jim Jones is right to be paranoid. The system feeds on attacks to grow stronger.
That's the loop. It takes any external perturbation and feeds it right back into the core belief. Then you pair that with the second fallacy, denying the antecedent, or DA.
Right.
The logic there goes, if Jim Jones leads us, we get racial justice and equality. Then the fatal fallacy, if we reject Jim Jones, racial justice and equality are completely impossible.
So what does this all mean when you combine them? The sources use this phrase, illicit biconditional. I read that and immediately got stuck. In plain English, what does that actually mean?
Basically, a biconditional means a two-way street where A entirely equals B, so B must entirely equal A. It means two concepts become completely indistinguishable. It is illicit because it's a false equivalence forced onto the members. The group's rules of inference forced them to believe that staying with the group was the only path to goodness. And leaving the group meant total destruction.
And that is terrifying. It wasn't just brainwashing. The group's internal logic physically destroyed their exit options. If leaving the group means giving up all hope for a just world, and staying means everyone outside is actively trying to destroy you, your options shrink to zero.
And we see the ultimate expression of that in how the logical rules literally contracted their physical geography. They moved from the U.S. to an isolated jungle in Guyana.
Right.
They became economically dependent. They severed ties with family.
Yeah.
The logical fallacies physically manifested as geographic walls. It destroyed external error correction and reversibility, which culminated in those horrific rehearsals of mass death they called white nights.
God.
When the inference corridor shrinks to nothing, death becomes the only navigable corridor left.
It is incredibly heavy to think about it in those structural terms. But it is so vital because I'm realizing that if we just assume Jonestown was dangerous because it had physical walls and a jungle compound, we completely miss the modern threat.
Completely.
Like, what happens when you don't have walls? I mean, Jonestown needed geographic isolation to close its corridor, but QAnon proves Bridge 360's point perfectly. The boundary between physical space and cyberspace is just a governance convenience.
Yeah.
QAnon achieved the exact same inferential closure purely through a digital network. Nobody had to pack their bags and move to a compound.
That is the crucial evolution the framework points out.
Yeah.
QAnon functions as what Bridge 360 calls a distributed inference engine.
Right, because there's no guy at a pulpit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In Jonestown, you had a highly centralized leader handing down the conclusions to the congregation. In QAnon, the anonymous figure known as Q didn't hand down conclusions at all. Q dropped highly ambiguous informational seeds, cryptic fragments.
Yeah.
The community then used the mandate to do your own research to crowdsource the interpretations themselves.
I kept thinking of an open-world video game. Imagine playing this massive, sprawling game where the players convince themselves that every random graphical glitch, every weird shadow on a wall, is actually a secret, intentional clue planted by the developers.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
The players do all the heavy lifting of building the lore, and the paradox here is astonishing to me. These people had total freedom, right? They could search the entire internet, they had information abundance, yet they ended up entirely trapped in one single, uncorrectable narrative.
They had information abundance, but zero inference optionality. And the ambiguity of those Q drops was the absolute key to their mimetic fitness.
So.
Think about it. If a centralized leader makes a highly specific, dated prediction and it fails, the belief system takes a massive hit. The corridor opens up a bit.
Right, people start questioning it.
But if a decentralized source just drops an ambiguous clue, millions of people search for patterns, find something in the real world that seems to fit, and they confirm their own bias. In a distributed system like that, failures disappear cheaply, but apparent hits propagate wildly.
And speaking of failures, the sources highlight a really critical detail about QAnon failing forward, because they did have a massive specific failure. When the storm prediction, the prophecy of mass arrests, completely failed on Inauguration Day in 2021, you'd think the corridor would shatter.
You'd think so.
But the meme didn't die.
It didn't die because the system's rule of inference was designed to absorb contradiction. Under normal logic, a failed prediction reduces confidence. But in a pathological system like this, the failure just generates more interpretive activity.
They basically just
move the goalposts, exactly.
Yeah.
They decided the dates were a deliberate trap for the deep state or it was a necessary optical deception. The meme mutated. It engaged in what sociologists call frame bridging.
Frame bridging.
Yeah, it bled out of standard political conspiracy and bridged into wellness communities, anti-vaccine networks, and alternative spirituality. The contradiction actually became productive. It generated more engagement, proving how a system can be incredibly anti-fragile to counter evidence, while simultaneously making the human users trapped inside it highly fragile.
Okay, so we've seen this happen in an isolated jungle, and we've seen it happen on decentralized message boards, but honestly, those are still somewhat fringe groups. What happens when this exact same corridor contraction gets hard-coded into a legitimate, multi-billion-dollar institution?
This is where it gets really serious.
Because the sources transition from the digital chaos of QAnon to the highly formalized data architecture of Palantir. And according to the 2025 SEC filings noted in the documents, 54% of Palantir's revenue comes from government customers.
That's a massive share.
Right. They are powering real-time decisions for agencies like ICE. How on earth does a software company fit into the Bridge 360 model?
It fits perfectly into what Bridge 360 calls ontology becoming action. Palantir offers enterprise platforms like Foundry and AIP, which are designed to create an ontology.
Okay, what is an ontology in this context?
Now, an ontology, in data science terms, is a formal map. It categorizes the messy, subjective real world into clean, actionable data objects. This person is a threat, this location is a risk, this individual is an associate.
I'm struggling with this last part, though. Here's where it gets really interesting, but also confusing. Palantir is basically just a giant filing cabinet for ICE, right? Like, it's just software logging data and organizing workflows for a government agency. How does a filing cabinet trap us the way a cult leader does? Why do the sources call this a potential entropic blowout?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the danger is that an ontology is only ever a partial map of reality. It's an approximation built by humans with human biases.
Sure.
But Palantir software takes that partial map and makes it executable. It wires the map directly into institutional action.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Let's walk through a micro scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine an ICE agent looking at a screen in Foundry. The software has categorized a specific city block as a high-risk node based on past, possibly biased arrest data.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Because the screen confidently says high risk, the commander sends 3 extra patrol cars to that block. Because there are 3 extra cars there, they naturally find and process more infractions.
Oh, wow.
Right. That new enforcement action generates new institutional data, which is fed right back into Foundry. The software basically says, see, I was right, increase the risk score. The humans think they're making objective decisions, but they're just executing the software's self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh my God. It's affirming the consequent, but at an institutional, algorithmic scale. The software literally creates the reality it claims to be predicting.
Precisely. And this is why Bridge 360 issues such a severe warning about what it calls caveat vectors and rollback semantics.
More terms. Okay, let's unpack those.
A caveat vector is basically a mandatory warning label. It's a systemic declaration of the model's limits and blind spots.
Okay, and rollback semantics.
Rollback semantics are essentially the systemic undo buttons, the ability to reverse bad actions when the model is proven wrong.
Oh, that's crucial.
Bridge 360 warns that without strict caveat vectors and robust rollback semantics, unresolved uncertainty acquires coercive institutional authority.
Say that again, coercive institutional authority.
Yes. The danger isn't that Palantir's data is inherently fake. The danger is that the system governs the real world based on unchecked, self-reinforcing assumptions that destroy our ability to navigate alternative realities. The map becomes the territory, and the territory is enforced by state power.
It is incredible how these sources synthesize all this. I mean, whether we are talking about a charismatic leader isolating people in a jungle, a decentralized digital mob hunting for clues, or a multi-billion-dollar enterprise operating system managing government enforcement data, the underlying structural threat is exactly the same.
It really is.
It is the destruction of optionality. It is the inability to safely reverse course when the model you are using fails. The inference corridor shrinks and shrinks until there is only one way forward.
And that brings us to the vital safeguard within the Bridge 360 Metatheory model itself. It's called the handshake protocol. Because Bridge 360 is deeply self-aware. It strictly categorizes itself as a band CB philosophy of science.
Wait, band CB, what are the other bands?
Think of band A as an absolute immutable law of physics, like gravity. Bridge 360 is saying, we are not Band A.
Gotcha.
Band CB means it is a highly functional working framework, a new vocabulary, but it explicitly states that it does not claim to possess absolute truth. It is a governance grammar that needs constant testing.
It refuses to become its own closed inference corridor. It literally demands external error correction.
Yes. The handshake protocol is an open invitation to actual domain experts, sociologists, neuroscientists, AI engineers, to test, validate, or reject its claims. It advocates for what it calls the 3-20-80 rule, or recursive Pareto propagation.
Okay, let's break down the numbers on that. What does that mean?
Bridge 360 provides the core 3%, the theoretical spine, the new philosophical vocabulary, but it requires the next 20% of scientists and engineers to operationalize it.
To actually make it work in the real world.
Exactly. They have to provide the actual measurements, build the caveat vectors, and stress test the models before it can ever safely reach the 80% of widespread societal application.
Which makes total sense. You don't roll out a theory of everything without a massive stress test.
This raises an important question for all of us. If we can recognize how easily human systems fall into these traps of inferential closure, from cults to algorithms, how do we design our educational, technological, and institutional systems to prioritize navigability?
Right.
How do we teach people to manage complexity and keep their options open rather than just forcing them to comply with whatever map is currently handed to them?
That is the ultimate challenge. And honestly, I really want to thank you, the listener, for going on this intense intellectual journey with us today. It is heavy material.
It's very dense.
It's dense. But this Bridge 360 lens feels so incredibly necessary for understanding the mechanics of the modern world. It gives us a vocabulary to see the invisible traps we build for ourselves and hopefully how to build some exit doors. But before we go, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought.
Oh, I'm ready.
A provocation built directly on this framework, but bringing it much closer to home. We've spent this deep dive talking about massive, headline-grabbing phenomena. Religious cults in the 70s, sprawling digital conspiracies, and government-scale data systems, all of them silently contracting our inference corridors.
Yep.
But what about the device sitting in your pocket right now? Think about the highly personalized algorithms curating the feed on your phone.
Yeah.
If a system learns exactly what emotional buttons to push to keep you scrolling,
Wow.
if it feeds your outrage back to you as validation day in and day out, is it subtly executing, affirming the consequent on your own personal identity?
That is a chilling thought.
Right. Are we quietly, willingly building individualized Jonestowns of one, entirely unaware that our own private inference corridors are shrinking by the minute? Think about that the next time you open an app. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.